name's Neil Farmer. I'm TSG Health and Safety Manager for the project sides of the business. As part of our SAFEtember presentations, I'm going to be discussing risk assessment. The presentation aims to provide an understanding of the process of risk assessment by promoting an understanding and engagement of the method statements and risk assessments that we produce for our works. This, we hope, will ensure and reassure employees that they have the skills to assess risks in their day-to-day work activities, and will hopefully illustrate how these skills at home and at work promote safety. Risk assessment is a real-world skill. It's something that we engage with every day in our day-to-day activities. For instance, you want to cross a road. You're looking to get to a shop that's directly in front of you, but there's a crossing. It's 50 metres away and in the wrong direction. So what do? You take information in and you make a judgment. How hazardous is it to make a crossing away from the crossing? In simple terms, that is risk assessment. Hopefully you come to the right conclusion and use the crossing, of course. Similarly, you risk assess your children as they grow. You have a toddler learning to walk. You have stairs in your home. Toddlers climb stairs. And unfortunately, if unsupervised, toddlers can have accidents on stairs. So what do you do to prevent the risk? You could move to a bungalow, perhaps a bit over the top. Or you could wrap your child in bubble wrap and make them wear a cycling helmet until they're 12. Not very practicable, so again, perhaps over the top. Or more simply, the installation of a safety gate. But there is still a risk. As this particular adventurous little one, he's managed to climb over a double height safety gate. So what we're doing is we're not eliminating, not removing, but we're still managing a risk to an acceptable level. Unfortunately, this chap doesn't want to play the game, and whatever measures they put in place weren't good enough to keep him at bay. In the workplace, we have legal duties. The Health and Safety at Work Act states that it shall be the duty of every employer to ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health, safety and welfare at work of all his employees. This does not require an employer to remove all risk or hazard from the workplace. So for the hazards and risks that we're made, we assess and apply control. The management of health and safety at work regulations, and in particular Regulation 3.1, requires that every employer shall make suitable and sufficient assessment of risk. Suitable and sufficient risk assessments will detail the harm receptor, who or what may be harmed. It might be the individual, a person, a type of injury that may occur. It could be an environmental receptor if a pollution event is likely, or even loss of something of value, damage to property or machinery. We look at how severe the harm that occurs would be. We also look at the likelihood. How likely is an event to happen? And then when we've considered that, we assess whether the risk is acceptable. We have to look at, have we done all that is reasonably practicable that would ensure that we're in compliance with the Health and Safety at Work Act. Employers such as TSG are required to record and review risk assessments. Employees also have duties under Section 7 of the Health and Safety at Work Act to take reasonable care for the health and safety of himself or of other persons who may be affected by his acts or omissions at work. And, a rather large sentence, as regards any duty or requirement imposed on his employer or any other persons by or under any of the relevant statutory provisions, to cooperate with him so far as is necessary to enable that duty or requirement to be performed or complied with. A very long-winded sentence, but what we'll concentrate on are the important words: to take reasonable care and cooperate. So from both of those paragraphs, if we just take those key words, they're the things to focus on. An employee must take reasonable care and cooperate. All the things that he may do or may fail to do, and to ensure that they cooperate with the things that are put in place by the employer to maintain health and safety. To take reasonable care, you must be able to assess the risks around you. You must be able to know how to control them and who may be harmed. Risk assessments and method statements document this for you. They give you an illustration of what's likely to happen. To cooperate, you need to be able to access this information and to use it effectively. TSG provide risk assessments and method statements. You need to be able to understand these to work safely and ensure compliance. There's a typical risk assessment. The activity recorded is the operation of an excavator. So we're looking at the hazards related to the activity and the control measures that are in place to make that activity as safe as is reasonably practicable. The limitation of this is that it's a generic risk assessment written by a competent person but usually sat at a desk, considering the risks associated with any hazard or activity, but again from a perspective of sitting behind a desk and looking at the generic risks that occur. Typical method statement, again for the use of an excavator and for ground workers around the excavator once it's in operation. Generic tasks, a generic process, again from the mindset of somebody sat at a desk. Bearing in mind the limitation of a generic risk assessment and a generic method statement, we're required to commence point of work risk assessments, actually at that point of work. As risk assessments are desk-based, this person's mindset, this person's view may not capture all the risks. Imagine somebody sat at a desk trying to risk assess and capture all the hazards of a very busy site like that. It would be a very, very conscious effort to be able to capture everything all on one document on one day. So we use clearance certificates. This records a point of work risk assessment for all the things that may not have been captured, those changes in conditions that occur that make the generic risk assessment slightly inadequate. It's just as a catch-all of the things that may develop or the unseen circumstances from that desk-based risk assessment process. In this way, we make a generic risk assessment site-specific by commencing point of work risk assessment. The point of work risk assessment process is recorded on the clearance certificate or can be amended to any risk assessment or method statement that is documented. As competent people out in the workspace, doing the role that is commensurate with your experience, HSSE inductions, UK PIRE training, those of you that have CS courses, have sat the SMSTS, all of these give you training on risk assessment. Your trade competencies, the apprenticeships you've been through, all of these teach you about risk. You know the risks associated with the role that you undertake. This gives you the skill to be able to commence point of work risk assessment. You have the skills, you're competent people, use of a clearance certificate, completely adequate for the process. When looking at point of work risk assessment, or more generally risk assessment, we use a hierarchy of control. In this way, we reduce the risks associated with a hazard. We can eliminate, substitute, place engineering controls, administrative controls, and BPA. Working our way down, the most effective controls are higher up on this inverted pyramid. If we eliminate something, take it away from site, take it away from the workspace, it can't cause us harm. More often than not really practicable. Substitution, again, if we bring something in that's less hazardous, that's an improvement in safety. Isolating, putting it behind a guard, behind a fence, away from human contact or away from the potential to pollute the environment, again, limiting the potential for harm. Administrative controls, just training, risk assessments, signage, all of these things improve the way we work and reduce the risk. And then bottom line, PPE. Just to illustrate somewhat further, if we eliminate or remove the hazard, work at height and confined space regulations both require that we consider, do we really need to go into that confined space? Do we really need to work at height? If not, we don't do it. But the hazard often has value. So not as clear cut as working at height or confined space, such as an excavator. That's a hazard. We need to bring it onto site. It has value. It helps us do the work. So taking it away from site, not reasonably practicable. So we could substitute the hazard. replace with something less hazardous, less harmful. Hydrochloric acid that we put in brick acid. A nasty substance with the potential to cause harm. Replace it with a similar product that has less hazardous substances in it. Again, we reduce the risk, reduce the potential for harm. Engineering controls create physical separation from the works in the same way that a guard on a milling machine prevents human contact with moving parts with hazardous substances during an operation. Administrative controls, your safe work processes, signage, training, all these things control the workers' minds, control their processes, make people work safely. All of the above are collective measures, so therefore more effective. The last line of defence, personal protective equipment, most limited but most frequently used. Last line of control. Its limitation being that it only protects the wearer and will only protect the wearer whilst they're wearing it. So we look at that hierarchy, work our way down to PPE. Higher up the inverted pyramid, more effective the measure is. Risk assessment in practice involves the use of a matrix. After we've applied the hierarchy of control, we look at those residual hazards, those residual risks, and we try to quantify them. We look at how likely an incident is to occur. We use a scale of 1 to 6 in varying likelihood, go from very unlikely to almost certainty. Then we consider the severity of the outcome, again using the same numeric scale, with outcomes ranging from trivial injuries to fatalities. We then multiply the value of a given risk and apply a rating. This is subjective, but it's based on experience, any information that we can glean, industry standards, industry data. And then if the risk rating remains high, we consider a different approach. We go back to the hierarchy of control again. If we've got a high number that might be red in the matrix, the work will not progress. In the event that we have a high risk remaining, contact your line manager, contact the HSSE Manager for your department. And again, if you need any assistance with any point in the process, we as HSSE managers are here to help. So to recap, risk assessment is not an overly complicated process. It's a skill that you have, it's a life skill. The skills have been taught to you as part of your training for your role. You won't be required to risk assess from scratch. We have lots and lots of data, lots and lots of generics for you to work with and from. Keep in mind that hierarchy of control at all times and use your HSSE Manager for guidance. So let's work together and go home safe. Thank you.